beneath me. I am a god, you dull creature, and I will not be bullied by that.
Puny god.
Hello ballers, it's Preacher. We're on our blood tanks. You guys have been waiting for this one for a while. Blood tanking is in its own little dimension of win at the moment. In patch 5.05 where we're talking about this one, blood is doing extremely well. I just tanked a couple of dungeons. This has to be brought up, is the total damage done. As you can see, I'm doing 40% of the damage done with an average of 52k. That's an average, worst to best. I pushed over 150k several times, up to 180k, without particularly trying. So we're going to talk about the effects of having this extra DPS and how that has affected our class and what kind of things we're going to be doing to make that more reliable and less of an issue. I don't want people to get too hung up on the DPS. It's not a trivial amount by any means, which means we really need to think about how we're going to affect that. So let's look at blood. We get Death Strike, of course. Death Strike, our most important attack of all time, EU. Focuses dark power into a strike that deals 392% weapon damage, plus 3,000 to an enemy, and heals you for 20% of the damage you sustained during the preceding 5 seconds. A minimum of at least 7% of your maximum health. This attack cannot be parried. Now, there's a lot of things that you need to take in there, okay? And it's going to affect how we gear and all sorts of stuff. This effect cannot be parried. That means it can be dodged, okay, and it can miss. Now, there is certain bugs going on with this, and we're not sure if it's a bug to do with the spell or the tooltip or whatever, but in general, you tend to still be getting the healing if you casted this regardless, okay? Now, there's a discussion about whether this is right, wrong, just update the tooltip. Either way, I don't care, okay? It's generally giving you the healing back, and that's all that really matters. It also generates you a blood shield, which we're going to be talking about later on as well. So all pretty good. We get Heart Strike. Instantly strike the target and up to 2 additional nearby enemies, causing 115% weapon damage. So you get this one. It costs 1 blood rune and it cleaves everything. It's pretty cool. Damage dealt is increased depending on your diseases by 15% each, making diseases very important. Rune Strike is our way of dumping runic power. You strike the target for 175% weapon damage. This attack cannot be dodged, blocked, or parried. Interestingly enough, note that one. Vampiric Blood, I'm going to talk about that later on, which generally increases your HP, like a last stand if you've ever played a warrior. We get Dancing Rune Weapon, which summons a secondary rune weapon. It costs 60 runic power. It duplicates your Deathknight's attacks. The runic weapon may also assist in defense of its master, granting an additional 20% parry, which is also awesome. So it's a defensive cooldown as well. And we also gain Rune Tap, which costs 1 blood, converts 1 blood rune into 10% of your maximum HP. Okay, we also pick up, I just want to make a point of this. Let's see if I can get into the spell book here. Where are we? Bone Shield as well. Bone Shield doesn't cost us anything on a 1-minute cooldown, surrounds you with a barrier of whirling bones. The Blood Shield begins with 6 charges, and each damaging attack consumes a charge. Now, remember, that can be magical or physical. While at least 1 charge remains, you take 20% less damage from all sources and lasts 5 minutes. This makes us one of the most efficient cooldown tank classes in the game, even outdoing the new Feral Guardian tanks. We also have Icebound Fortitude as well. 50% straight up reduced damage to become immune to stun effects as well. So we have a lot of cooldowns with Dancing Rune Weapon, Vampiric Blood, Rune Tap. We also have Icebound Fortitude, Vampiric Blood, Bone Shield, all these things mixed in together, guys. We have a ton of cooldowns. So we have a lot to talk about with our Blood DK. So make sure you're getting the most out of him. Make sure we're rocking and rolling. So let's talk about our talents and what do we recommend. Now, there's all sorts of things you can pick up for your Blood DK depending on what encounter you are doing. This is what it is with a Blood DK, especially if you're a raid tank. Get used to what all your abilities do. If you're doing 5-mans, this character is built for 5-mans to go in and rock those heroics, get geared up and get ready for the early raids, as most of you guys will be doing, okay? So I like to pick up Roiling Blood. Your Blood Boil also triggers pestilence and diseases the target. This also means that when you Blood Boil, You're refreshing the diseases on your current target, so your outbreak doesn't need to be relied upon in order to refresh your diseases and all that kind of stuff. I love this one. We're going to be pulling a lot of mobs in our heroics. A hell of a lot of mobs. We're going to be chain pulling. I'm going to run a 5-man dungeon for you after this video, and then I'm going to upload that so you can see how this all works in action. And you're going to see how many blood boils we are pulling off. It's a lot. A hell of a lot of blood boils. If we take a look here, blood boil did 3.13 million damage for me in the last dungeon. Really immense, and it spreads those diseases out, so we're constantly gaining threat on everything, as well as a non-trivial amount of DPS. Unholy Blight is cool, but compare it to just blood boiling, which we do it naturally anyway. It's not even in the competition. The same with Plague Leech, okay? We're going to be keeping our diseases on all the time. We don't really want to be recasting diseases while we're tanking. We would rather use those runes in a much better way, such as a Death Strike. Being more defensive and healing ourselves and gaining blood shields is far more important. Therefore, Roiling Blood is the way to go for me. I personally like it. Take Plague Leech if you're doing some single target tanking mixed with your outbreak, and therefore you can generate some extra runes, okay? So it all works out pretty well. Your next one is some sort of defensive cooldown. Now, for straight up tanking, you're going to want to rock Purgatory. An Unholy Pact grants you the ability to fight on through damage that would normally kill mortals. When you would sustain fatal damage, you instead are wrapped in a Shroud of Purgatory, absorbing incoming healing equal to the amount of damage prevented, lasting for 3 seconds. If any healing absorption remains when a Shroud of Purgatory expires, you die. This is your get out of jail free card. Every time a huge heal is about to land on you, it is guaranteed to land in the next 3 seconds after you died. Therefore, if you're straight up raid tanking or worried about dying in any situation, Purgatory is just always good. It's a passive. It prevents you from dying. It's very similar to Ardent Defender that Paladins used to have, not the current Ardent Defender, as this is passively keeping you alive. And when this Purgatory drops, especially in a raid environment, guys, you're likely to get those heals that would have saved you from dying. And you just get this extra life. You put in your continue, you put in your coin, Purgatory rocks and rolls. If it's some sort of raid cooldown you're looking for, Anti-Magic Zone is going to be the winner if you're in no particular danger of tank death. Leech Bomb generally doesn't really win out compared to either of these. For straight up tanking, rock the Purgatory and be happy with it. It's there protecting you. It's like the hand of God behind you. It's always good. The next one is some movement speed increase, unless specifically called upon to be doing some kiting or something like that where you require chillblains or anything like that. Death's Advance is nearly 100% of the time the winner, okay? You get a 10% movement speed increase, which you always want as a tank to get to the mobs at least at the same pace as the DPS, and plus you can use it on cooldown as a zoom button, so you can go speedy, speedy, speedy. Look at that, movement speed increase of 30% that costs us nothing. Costs you absolutely no resource, and you get this zoom effect to go and pick up mobs, get to the next trash quicker, whatever it might be. Always pretty much going to be the winner. Your next choice is some sort of healing. Death Pact is pretty damn awesome. It's hard to argue with Death Pact, although there's definitely some argument towards conversion for the Blood DK, as we generate a lot of runic power that we can use elsewhere, and it heals you for so much HP. 3% of your maximum health every 1 second while generating a ton of HP. Personally, for me, Death Pact. I don't like slow hots on me. I don't like using this to heal for 100% of damage dealt. That is not a great deal of healing coming from Death Siphon. Even though it is spammable, kind of, with Death Runes, it's not the best. Death Pact, on demand, huge heal whenever I need it. Oh crap, I'm about to die. Boom, Death Pact, I'm back in the game. Always nice to see that. The next one is how you regenerate your runes. It depends what you want. If it's a very DPS intensive fight, overall DPS intensive, Runic Empowerment gives you generally more DPS, and DPS is something we really need to consider now as a tank, especially a DK. Runic Corruption, however, generally gives you a much more steady, less RNG income of runes overall. So you're going to get a much better spread of runes throughout your fights, which means in a heroic where you're swapping from AoE to single target on a very regular basis, Runic Corruption is going to be the best for you. Blood Tap has its merits as well for burst situations. Do you need burst on-demand DPS? Because a tank contributes heavily to the DPS now. If it's something that needs bursting down, Blood Tap is going to be beneficial to you. If it's just generally high DPS, Runic Empowerment should win on a single target boss fight. 5-man heroics, I recommend your Runic Corruption. Your level 90 talent is whatever your raid needs you to have. Do you need to be grabbing mobs together to tank them better? Caster mobs spread out everywhere. Gorfien's Grasp is the way to go. Do you need some sort of stun? Remorseless Winter. Do you need to make sure your character is in complete control? Desecrated Ground. Again, whatever the boss demands of you is what you should be picking up. Okay? There's no set path. It's not an answer to a question. The question is, what does this boss require of me? In general, for your 5-mans, Gorfien's Grasp is going to be the most beneficial. That's why I roll with it. Just think Sholomance, when all those ads start AoEing and they're all spread out and somebody's pulled them, they're all over the place. Or Scarlet Monastery, same thing. Gorfien's Grasp just drags everything to you, and you're in a much better situation to Blood Boil them, to Death and Decay them, and just have a generally much easier time tanking them. Glyphs. There's a nice choice of glyphs for the Blood DK that I particularly like. One is Dancing Rune Weapon for that immediate pull. Just gets you 100% more threat just at the start of the fight. Gets things going. And also duplicates your damage. It's always nice, especially if you're rolling with different kinds of builds. I like the Dancing Rune Weapon glyph. Personally, I just always like to feel more comfortable. Glyph of AMS causes your AMS shell to absorb all incoming damage up to the absorption limit instead of the 75%. This entirely depends on the fight for a tank, as we're generally using AMS to just stop a certain mega attack. Entirely up to you, okay, whether or not you take this glyph, depending on what you're tanking. Always nice to pack in a 5-man heroic, though, I find. Glyph of Vampiric Blood is generally the glyph that is taken, especially for raid tanks. Increases the bonus healing received for your Vampiric Blood is active by an additional 15%, but no longer grants you more health. There are rare cases where having straight up more HP is better than this, and you will know them when you hit them. The boss has some mega attack that you need to survive. Generally, it's just that one big burst of incoming damage. Therefore, you don't want this glyph. In general, though, you'll be feeling low. Healers are casting at you. Therefore, this extra 15% healing is likely to give you more effective health than straight up extra stamina, okay? Straight up extra HP is not as good as much more healing being received. So that's the benefit of that one. Some other glyphs I like to recommend are Glyph of Army of the Dead. So your Army of the Dead is still a great source of DPS for a Blood DK. Get it? So you can use your Army of the Dead in a nice, efficient manner. And Glyph of Resilient Grip. If your Death Grip fails, it's also resetting the cooldown. Your Death Grip still taunts mobs, okay? Make sure you've not got Tranquil Grip in there. And if you can't be Death Gripping that target, you still have Death Grip and that extra taunt ready if you're trying to gather ads or something along those lines. All pretty cool. Alright, Ballers, so those are your glyphs. Now let's get to the controversial bit. What are we reforging? There are two lines of thinking here, depending on how you want to play your Blood DK. Both are correct. Both have their merits. One is to go with the classic thinking, where I come from, kind of old school thinking, which is a tank should be straight up avoiding and not caring too much about his DPS. Now, as a Blood DK, our mitigation is actually called reactive mitigation. Therefore, because our Blood Shield heals us depending on the damage we take, we need to be making sure that we are maximizing our uptimes and usage of Death Strike instead of mindlessly spamming it. We need to be taking into account all sorts of things. If you are of that mind, your first thing you want to do is get as much stamina as you can to survive a couple of attacks from the raid boss. If you can survive 2 attacks straight up from that raid boss, you're going to be in good shape, okay? And now you can start looking at more defensive stats. Hit and expertise can now be considered defensive stats. Through things such as Rune Strike, Death Strike and Heart Strike, we're actually generating a lot of resources which in turn turn into more resources which allow us to survive better. Okay? So it is very much a case of being hit and expertise capped is pretty cool. Now I've not gone for the caps here, but I've gone quite high. I would consider this very high for me as a classic tank. I have got, this is the stat priorities for this build. We'll call this build number 1. This is making sure you're getting the best use out of your Death Strikes and your Heart Strikes. And this is going for mastery overall. Get as much mastery as you can. Then hit and expertise as much as possible. And then your other stats below that. You don't want any crit or haste or anything like that. It don't affect you more. Haste is slightly more beneficial than everything else. But you want as much mastery as possible. Then you hit an expertise. And then focus on your avoidance. Okay? Now, I need to talk about avoidance here. This is going to be a relatively long video. Dodge is not worth as much as parry. In general, this is super general. Now, these numbers change every time you gain a point of dodge. Aim for having a little bit more than double the amount of parry as your dodge. So as you can see, I have 5% approaching 6 dodge. I've got over 12% parry. This is because dodge, the effectiveness of dodge rating, which adds dodge, is significantly less powerful and hits diminishing returns much more quickly than parry does. So every point of dodge is worth less than every point of parry. As we get more dodge, this becomes more and more the case. Therefore, as let's say we had 10% dodge, we would aim for more than 20% It's a 25% parry in relation. So check your stats, okay? You want much more parry than dodge. If you're generally just concerned about trying to get it perfect, just go for more than double. Just about more than double the parry than you have dodge, and you're making a good use of your stats. A very good use of your stats. Just to reiterate, do not care anything about haste and crit. Don't even consider them. This is build number 1. Build number 2 ignores hit and expertise entirely in favor of boosting our natural avoidance. Okay? Boosting our natural avoidance. So what we would do is we would literally prioritize mastery, parry, and dodge. We forget completely about hit and expertise. And we certainly forget about crit and haste or any of those things. We literally get as much avoidance as naturally possible so the boss just hits us less. And we can still use all our abilities, they'll be slightly less effective. This, in turn, puts less of the control in your hands. But in terms of overall, unless you're a super, super great player, you're not going to see a particularly huge difference. You will see a difference, however, in your DPS. And as I said, your DPS these days is not trivial. It's worthwhile to the raid. I personally am preferring, against my better judgment, build number 1, where I'm adding more DPS and have the same sort of levels of survivability, and I have more control over my survivability. I relatively like that. If you're just getting into tanking and you just want to make sure your ass survives, generally go with a more dodge parry heavy build, but still mastery is overwhelmingly good. In terms of your gemming, get as much mastery as possible. You want to gem as much stamina as you need to survive a couple of hits from the boss, and then go for mastery. Your gem slot bonuses are always going to be pretty good. Because I like things hard, and plus this character has little to no tank gear, I'm going to roll in a combination of PvP gear and DPS gear for you guys. Because people are always worried about stepping into a heroic in shitty gear. I'm going to do it for you guys. I'm going to do it. So you can see I'm wearing complete DPS stuff. There's no tank gear here at all. I think the boots are as close as I get. That is it. But as you can see on the Reforging, mastery, mastery, mastery. Haste to hit, because we always have mastery. And there we go. Mastery, left alone, not reforged. Going again. Expertise to hit. All this kind of stuff, guys. Really important. Crit to mastery. Trying to get mastery on literally every single item. Mastery is just awesome. Really, really good. Get as much of it as you possibly can. You'll be in better shape for it. You really, really will be. As for your gemming, again, you either want to choose between the Stamina Meter Gem, which increases your stamina, the Austere Diamond, or maybe even go ahead and use the Spell Damage Diamond. If you are in a particular fight that gives you massive amounts of spell damage incoming, that 2% spell damage reduction is going to be even better for you. Let's talk about Rune Forging for a second, as it's DK specific and it's important. Let's go over here. Now, the standard rune forge that people go for is, of course, Rune of the Stone Skin Gargoyle. Now, you have choices here, guys. This is not the old days where it was just Rune of the Stone Skin Gargoyle. Rune of the Stone Skin Gargoyle is pretty cool for when you're just starting. It gives you 4% armor and 2% extra stamina. While you're building up your stamina, and your stamina is still relatively weak, it's pretty nice overall. General purpose is what I want to say there. General usage is Stone Skin Gargoyle. However, as you get better and get more gear and start understanding the fights better, you're going to start picking up things like Sword Shattering. Parry, 4% extra defense. Now remember, if you don't need the stamina from Stone Skin Gargoyle, the parry is going to be more effective than the armor gain. Effectively, that stamina becomes useless if you're surviving those attacks. Therefore, that parry chance is going to be much, much better. Also, bear in mind, Spell Shattering, okay? Deflects 4% of all spell damage taken. This means that DKs are in a very unique position to not only mitigate tons of magical damage through things like Anti-Magic Shell and Anti-Magic Zone, but we can also add this on top and the Meta Gem in order to get an extra 6% damage reduction from all magical attacks. Blood DKs, my friends, are all powerful just now. They are very, very, very good. Very, very good. Rotation, there's not much for me to tell you about tank rotation. You obviously want your diseases up, and you want to be using your heart strikes and your blood runes, and then moving in to your death runes and using them as much as possible. You're generally going to be DPSing these days. AoEing is going to involve a lot of blood boil, while still making use of those death runes to be defensive. And you can make the choices much more readily on a blood DK as to whether or not you're going to be more aggressive with more blood boils or more defensive with those death strikes. Entirely your choice. Judge it on a case-by-case basis. Try not to let your runic power build up too much. You'll be losing the possibility of extra runes and more runic corruption procs, like you can see there. In general, the strategy of keeping one blood rune ready for when you emergency need that blood tap still applies. Try and keep yourself with one blood rune and one regenerating. It's always nice. And then as soon as you see your other one is almost regenerated, go ahead and use the other one, leaving you a 1 or 2 second gap between having that blood rune ready. That is one of the nicest strategies of doing this. Always nice to do it with the blood DK. Other than that, monitor your cooldowns, your blood shield, and all your bone shield, and all that kind of good stuff. Alright, guys? We're going to jump into a 5-man now and see if we can get this to play out. I hope I haven't overwhelmed you with numbers. Feel free to leave me questions or send them to preachgaming@gmail.com. Let's get into a 5-man now and really rock that world. Alright, ballers? Bye.